What if the biggest story of the WNBA season had nothing to do with who won games or who scored the most points? What if it started with a $500 fine that someone in a league office probably thought would disappear by Wednesday morning? Because that is not what happened. Not even close. Instead, that fine turned into a domino effect that transformed a veteran role player into one of the most talked about personalities in women's basketball. We're talking sold-out merchandise, national brand deals with major companies, and a professional wrestling offer from one of the most powerful ownership figures in American sports. And here's the thing that makes this story actually matter. None of it was planned. None of it was coordinated. None of it was some calculated PR stunt designed to generate headlines. Every single piece of this traces back to one decision the WNBA made that they almost certainly wish they could take back. So let's walk through exactly how it happened, why it kept escalating, and what it reveals about where women's basketball is actually headed, whether the league is ready for it or not. Before the fine, before the viral moments, before any of this made national headlines, Sophie Cunningham had already been doing something that a growing number of people were starting to pay very close attention to. Not for her scoring averages, not for highlight reel plays or athletic achievements, for something much harder to quantify, and as it turned out, much harder for fans to stop watching once they noticed it. She was protecting Caitlin Clark quietly, consistently, and without waiting for anyone to ask her to do it or publicly announce what she was doing. Cunningham had spent 6 full seasons with the Phoenix Mercury before being traded to the Indiana Fever heading into the 2025 season. That made her a 7-year professional by the time the season tipped off. A veteran presence with experience, leadership, and basketball intelligence dropped directly into a locker room that had been completely restructured around a rookie who had arrived carrying more national attention than almost any player in the history of the league. This is important context because it creates a dynamic that could have gone in completely different directions. That kind of situation, a seasoned veteran suddenly playing a supporting role to a first-year player with a massive media following and a target on her back from opposing teams, could very easily have created friction underneath the surface. It could have sparked resentment. It could have turned into a quiet war for positioning that plays out in subtle ways throughout a long season, in missed screens and delayed rotations, and all the small passive-aggressive moves that happen when veterans feel displaced. That is not what happened in Indiana. The relationship between these two players became something else entirely. What happened instead was that Cunningham appeared to embrace the role of protector almost immediately, and fans started noticing long before the mainstream sports media even realized something significant was happening. Clips had been circulating in Fever fan communities since early in the season. Cunningham stepping between Clark and opposing players when things got physical, offering a hand after hard fouls and pulling Clark up off the court, using her body to absorb contact that had no business going uncalled. These moments were becoming a pattern. None of these individual moments were especially dramatic on their own when you watch them in isolation. They did not go viral individually on Twitter or TikTok or any of the platforms where basketball highlights usually blow up. But collectively, when you watch them all together, they were telling a clear story that a dedicated, engaged fan base was already fluent in by the time summer arrived. The people who were paying attention to women's basketball closely, the ones scrolling through highlight reels and watching full games, they understood exactly what was happening and why it mattered. That context is enormously important for everything that followed, because when the moment finally came that stopped being quiet and subtle and started making national headlines, it did not feel like something completely new to the people who had been paying attention all season long. It felt like confirmation of something they already knew. It felt like validation of a narrative they had already assembled in their own minds over months of careful observation. The foundation was already built. The story was already written. It just needed a single unmistakable moment to announce itself to everyone else, to break through into the mainstream sports conversation where casual fans would finally understand what serious fans had been seeing all along. That moment arrived on June 17th, and it lasted less than 10 seconds. The Indiana Fever were facing the Connecticut Sun in a regular season game, and Caitlin Clark had already taken a shot to the eye earlier in that game. The kind of play that gets noticed in the moment, gets briefly discussed on social media, and then gets absorbed into the general physical chaos of a professional basketball game without any real consequence from the officials. No whistle, no review, no conversation. Just another hard foul in a league where hard fouls happen constantly. Clark was still working through it, still competing, still trying to play her game when the situation escalated in a way that made ignoring it impossible. The physical contact continued, the pattern persisted, and something shifted. Sophie Cunningham did not wait for a whistle that was not coming. She made a decision in that moment. She grabbed Connecticut Sun guard Sheldon, took her to the ground, and accepted the ejection that followed without any apparent hesitation or regret. Both players were tossed with under a minute remaining on the clock. The game continued, but the moment had already escaped the arena and entered something much larger. Within 24 hours, Cunningham had gained roughly 500,000 new followers across TikTok and Instagram combined. Her jerseys started moving off shelves. Her name began trending on its own, completely independent of any box score or stat line that would normally generate attention. And the reason that happened had almost nothing to do with basketball as a sport, and everything to do with a frustration that had been building in the fan base for weeks before she finally gave it something concrete to attach itself to. Something physical, something undeniable. But here's what made this moment resonate so deeply. It was not manufactured anger. It was not a narrative that some media outlet or fan faction had pushed to start a fight. Coaches across the league had been raising legitimate concerns about officiating consistency throughout the season. The Fever head coach Stephanie White had publicly acknowledged the growing tension around how games were being called. Other coaches echoed the same complaint, always carefully worded to avoid fines themselves, but pointed enough that everyone understood what they were really saying. Cunningham's action gave voice to something real, something systemic, something that had been frustrating players and coaches for months. What Cunningham did on June 17th was step directly into that accumulated frustration and give it a physical form that could not be ignored or dismissed. She did not hold a press conference to complain about officiating. She did not give a calculated interview where she carefully worded criticism to avoid league attention. She grabbed someone and went to the floor. She accepted the consequences immediately. And in doing so, she became the answer to a question that a lot of people had been asking quietly throughout the entire season. Is anyone actually going to do something about this? Is anyone going to acknowledge that something is fundamentally broken in how these games are being called? The answer, apparently, was yes. And the person providing that answer was a 7th-year veteran from Phoenix who most casual fans had never even heard of 4 weeks earlier. That was about to change very rapidly. But before everything exploded, the league was going to try to do something about Cunningham, too. And that decision would turn a regional story into a national one in ways that nobody anticipated. On July 18th, Cunningham posts a video to TikTok that on its surface looks almost too simple to matter. She is lip-syncing to a line from a Sabrina Carpenter song. The lyrics are direct. Stupid, or is it slow? Maybe it's useless. The caption tags some referees. No names attached. No direct accusations, no explicit statement, just a pointed, sarcastic jab wrapped in a trending audio clip that millions of people were using. The kind of thing that gets posted and forgot 100 times a day across the platform. Millions of teenagers making similar videos. It should have been completely forgettable. Except this one did not get forgotten. It hit 1.3 million views within days. The video spread through basketball fan communities and beyond. People were sharing it. People were talking about it. And the WNBA decided it required a formal response from the league office. This was the moment where things shifted from a player making a social media post to an institutional conflict between a player and the organization that employs her. The fine came in at $500. In professional sports terms, that is a rounding error, a minor administrative note, the kind of thing that under normal circumstances gets paid quietly and disappears from the news cycle before it ever really enters one. Most players get fined, pay the fine, say nothing about it, and move forward. The fine becomes invisible. The system works the way it was designed to work, which is quietly, without drawing public attention, without creating narratives about league discipline. But these were not normal circumstances, and Cunningham was not the kind of player who was going to let it disappear quietly into the background. She posted about the fine directly on social media. The tone was not angry. It was not defensive or aggressive. It was almost amused, like someone who had predicted exactly this outcome and found it faintly absurd that the league had decided to prove her right so efficiently. She had made a sarcastic comment about officiating. The league had responded by fining her, and the whole thing was kind of ridiculous. She wrote that she had been fined $500 for the TikTok, that she found the situation somewhat funny and ironic, and that the league might want to consider focusing on more pressing matters, like the actual officiating problems that coaches had been complaining about all season. Then she moved on. No extended rant. No emotional breakdown. Just acknowledgement and a light touch of sarcasm. The internet did not move on. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments flooded in from fans offering to help cover the fine themselves. Jokes spread like wildfire about the league fining players for pointing out problems, while the problems themselves continued uncorrected on the court. Cunningham was praised loudly and repeatedly for saying out loud what many people had been thinking privately for most of the entire season. She became a voice for a frustration that was widespread, but had been quietly tolerated. And something important happened in the middle of all of that noise and response. The story shifted fundamentally. It was no longer primarily a story about referees missing calls or inconsistent officiating across the league. It had become a story about a player being punished for noticing and speaking up. That is a fundamentally different conversation, and it was a much stickier one for the league because it added a villain to a narrative that previously only had victims. Now there was someone to blame, some institution to criticize, some entity to hold accountable. It is also worth understanding that the $500 fine did not exist in isolation. Earlier that same month, two New York Liberty players, guard Natasha Cloud and forward Isabel Harrison, had received fine warnings for wearing hats on the sideline during a game that neither of them was even active for because they were dealing with injuries. Neither incident involved anything resembling unsportsmanlike conduct in any meaningful sense of the phrase. Yet both drew formal league attention and administrative action, while the officiating concerns that coaches had been raising all season apparently did not require the same urgency or response. That pattern, fines for sideline hats and sarcastic TikToks, while missed calls and inconsistent officiating rolled on uncorrected, fueled a perception that was already forming in the fan base. The league's fine protocols were not just inconsistent in their application. They appeared to be pointed in exactly the wrong direction. The league was punishing players for speaking up about problems instead of fixing the problems themselves. That is a terrible look for any organization, and it made the narrative even stickier. There was one more element that made this particular fire harder to put out than the league may have anticipated when they issued that initial $500 fine. The WNBA's fines were not regularly made public by the league itself. The league did not announce fines or create press releases about discipline. They typically became public only when the players themselves chose to share them, which meant the entire system operated in a kind of quiet opacity that served the league reasonably well as long as players went along with staying quiet about what they were being punished for. This system worked because it maintained an information asymmetry. The league had power through secrecy. Players who got fined could pay quietly, move on, and no one else would ever know. The whole thing stayed between the player and the organization. The fan base never found out what rules had been broken or why discipline had been handed down. The league maintained control of the narrative because the narrative never became public in the first place. It was brilliant in a way, a system designed to protect institutional power by keeping the details hidden. Cunningham made a different choice, and that choice changed everything about how this situation developed. She made the fine visible. She made it legible to anyone scrolling through social media. She turned it into a data point in an argument that fans were already winning. She did not just represent herself in making that choice. She gave everyone who had been frustrated with the officiating situation a concrete, specific, undeniable example to point at. Here is the league punishing a player for criticism instead of fixing the problems. Here is proof of what everyone suspected. The $500 fine was supposed to send a message. The league wanted to send a message that criticism would be met with consequences. The message it actually sent was not the one they intended, and it was about to get considerably more complicated because Cunningham was not done. Not even close. She had started something that was going to continue escalating in ways that nobody could have predicted. By making the fine public, she essentially broke the system that had kept the league's discipline processes quiet and invisible. Other players started talking about their fines. Other players started asking why certain infractions were being punished while others were ignored. The transparency that Cunningham created became contagious. She had opened a door that the league had been trying to keep closed. What made this particularly effective was that Cunningham was not angry about it. That is what made it so hard to dismiss or shut down. If she had posted an angry rant, if she had attacked the league directly, if she had positioned herself as a victim, then the league could have responded with institutional power. They could have fined her again. They could have suspended her. They could have made her look like a troublemaker. But she posted with amusement. She made the league look ridiculous by being amused by their own action. She made the whole thing into a moment of comedy, which made it impossible to take seriously in the way the league wanted people to. The timing of everything was also working against the league in ways they probably did not see coming. The fine happened during the off-season. There were no active games happening. There was no basketball drama to distract from the story. The $500 fine became the main story, and it stayed the main story because there was nothing else competing for attention. If this had happened during the regular season, it might have gotten buried under box scores and highlights. But it happened when the league was quiet, which meant it had room to grow and spread unchecked. Social media was also moving faster than the league's communication apparatus could respond to. By the time anyone in the WNBA's front office was drafting a response, the conversation had already moved on to the next thing. By the time they could have issued a statement, the moment had already become something bigger than any single statement could contain. This is the fundamental problem that traditional institutions face when dealing with social media. They move slowly, and social media moves fast. What the league had not anticipated was that Cunningham had a direct line to her audience. She did not need a reporter to cover the story. She did not need ESPN to pick it up. She did not need the league's permission to participate in the conversation about her own fine. She could just post about it, and thousands of people would see it immediately. Millions would see it within hours. The democratization of media had completely undermined the league's ability to control the narrative through opacity and silence. The $500 fine had been designed as a tool to maintain control. Instead, it became a catalyst for the loss of control. Every time the league tried to use its institutional power to silence Cunningham, it just made the story bigger. Every fine was another data point that fans could use in their argument about the league being more interested in punishing players for speaking up than fixing actual problems. The league was essentially providing ammunition for the people criticizing them. This is what makes the whole thing such a fascinating case study in modern power dynamics. The traditional tools of institutional control, fines, discipline, administrative action, they all backfired because they were applied in a media environment where the institution no longer had a monopoly on the narrative. Cunningham could respond faster than the league could manage the situation. She could make the league look bad without ever being explicitly critical. She could control her own story in ways that previous generations of athletes simply could not. Barbie Night at Gainbridge Fieldhouse was supposed to be exactly what it sounds like, a light-hearted promotional evening designed to generate social media engagement and fun for the fans. Pink lighting throughout the arena. Themed giveaways for everyone who attended. The kind of game night spectacle that generates a few social posts and some good vibes before everyone moves on to the next thing. The Fever were hosting the Chicago Sky, and it was supposed to be a fun night. Sophie Cunningham made it into something else entirely by doing something so simple that it should not have mattered at all. She walked into the arena wearing a plain white t-shirt with 4 words printed across the front. Hot girls eat Arby's. Black leather shorts. No elaborate styling. No elaborate explanation. No big announcement. Just a shirt, a pair of shorts, and the kind of confident absurdity that photographs extremely well and spreads across social media before the first quarter is even over. The photo hit the internet within minutes, and the reaction was immediate. People started sharing it. People started talking about it. It became a moment, but what made this moment work was not just the shirt itself, which was funny and eye-catching. It was the history behind it, the context that made it land so perfectly. That context is what transformed a random outfit choice into a brand moment. Back in April, before any of this other stuff had happened, Cunningham had posted a video trying Arby's for the first time on camera. It went viral in a low-key, genuinely charming way, not because it was staged or calculated or obviously manufactured, but because she reacted to the food like a real person and not like someone performing enthusiasm for a brand partnership check. She was genuinely trying something new, genuinely reacting to it, and people responded to that authenticity. It was refreshing to see someone just be themselves instead of performing a role. That video was the foundation for everything that came next. By the time the Barbie Night shirt appeared weeks later, Arby's had almost certainly been watching her account for months. Their marketing team knew who she was, knew what her audience responded to, and had positioned themselves to move fast when the right moment arrived. The right moment was always going to come, they just had to be ready for it. The right moment arrived at Barbie Night, and Arby's moved fast. They reposted the photo. They crowned her an unapologetic queen. They effectively named her a brand ambassador in real time in front of an audience that had no idea the partnership was coming. The whole thing felt spontaneous because so much of it actually was. But the brand recognition, the pre-existing relationship, the audience that was already primed to respond, none of that was accidental. This was strategic, but it was executed so smoothly that it felt organic. Fans flooded the replies with praise. People celebrated both Cunningham and whoever at Arby's had the confidence and speed to green-light the collaboration quickly enough to make it feel seamless. The shirt became available to the public, and it sold out across small, medium, and large sizes within roughly 2 days. Complete sellout. This was not some limited drop that generated buzz for a week. This was actual demand, actual people buying the product because they connected with the moment. What is remarkable about this is that none of it followed the traditional influencer marketing playbook. No elaborate campaign behind it. No weeks of planning and negotiation. No scripted commercial that took months to film. No influencer contract negotiated in detail months in advance. A player wore a shirt she apparently found funny. A brand recognized the moment and amplified it instead of ignoring it. And the result was the kind of authentic marketing that companies spend enormous amounts of money trying to manufacture and almost never successfully do. The timing of all of this was not lost on anyone paying attention, because the Arby's shirt appeared just days after the $500 TikTok fine. A fine that was supposed to make Cunningham more cautious, more measured, more aware of the consequences of drawing league attention and criticism. What it actually produced was a player who walked into a nationally covered game night wearing something guaranteed to keep the story going and extend her visibility in every possible direction. The league had just punished her for speaking up, and she responded by becoming even more visible, even more marketable, even more undeniable as a personality. This is the genius of Cunningham's approach, whether intentional or instinctive. Every time the league tried to control her, she got bigger. Every time they tried to silence her, she became louder. Not through aggression or anger, but through authenticity and action. She wore a funny shirt and it sold out. That is the opposite of what the fine was supposed to accomplish. The fine was supposed to diminish her. Instead, it accidentally accelerated her rise. By this point in the season, Cunningham's endorsement portfolio had expanded well beyond basketball into completely different industries and product categories. Adidas for athletic gear, Quest Nutrition for sports supplements, Ring for smart home security, Mad Hippie for skincare, Skims for apparel, Spindrift for sparkling water, Commerce Bank for financial services. A wide enough spread across completely different industries that it no longer looked like a single opportunistic deal or a short-term trend play designed to capitalize on viral moments. It looked like a cross-section of major brands that had independently arrived at the same conclusion. This player is believable. This player generates genuine attention. This player's audience actually responds to her authentically. This player is worth investing in. None of them needed her to be the highest scorer on her team. None of them cared about her point averages or shooting percentages. They needed her to be real, and real was exactly what she had spent the entire season proving she was. The Arby's moment confirmed what the brand deals were already saying. But the most unexpected offer was still coming, and it arrived from a direction that nobody had predicted. San Diego Comic-Con, a massive convention that has no direct connection to basketball whatsoever. Women of Wrestling founder David Mellon is speaking at a panel, and midway through his remarks, he brings up a name that had no obvious reason to come up in that room at that moment. Sophie Cunningham. Mellon, an Indianapolis native who had apparently been watching the Fever closely that entire season, said he had come away from watching Cunningham completely convinced that she belonged in a professional wrestling ring. He was not joking about it. He was serious. He reached for a specific comparison that landed exactly how he intended it to. He called her the Marty Marbury of Caitlin Clark's Wayne Gretzky. For anyone not fluent in hockey history, Marbury was the enforcer who played alongside Gretzky for years. The player whose entire role on the ice was absorbing punishment, delivering it back when necessary, and protecting the most important player on the team regardless of personal cost. It was the perfect analogy for what Cunningham had been doing all season. The comparison was pointed and deliberate, and it established her role in terms that athletes understand deeply. Sitting beside him at the panel was Jeannie Buss, controlling owner of the Lowe's Angels Lakers, co-owner of Women of Wrestling alongside Mellon, one of the most recognizable names in American professional sports ownership. This was not some random person making a casual comment. This was one of the most powerful figures in sports having a conversation about Cunningham at a major convention. Buss did not let the moment pass quietly or just move on to the next topic. She took to social media directly and publicly, writing that the promotion would love to have Cunningham join them, calling her talented, dedicated, and a fierce competitor. This was not a casual offhand remark made and forgotten. This was a public recruitment post from a major ownership figure made with no ambiguity about the seriousness behind it. A Lakers owner publicly announcing that she wanted Cunningham to join her wrestling promotion. That is not something that happens casually in sports. The natural question is obvious. Why would the owner of an NBA franchise take a public interest in recruiting a WNBA player for professional wrestling? What is the logic behind that? And the answer, once you have followed Cunningham's entire season from the beginning to that point, is not actually that surprising if you think about what she has become. She had become, through a combination of instinct and circumstance, exactly the kind of crossover personality that professional sports rarely produces. Physical, outspoken, genuinely comfortable with confrontation, completely unbothered by attention regardless of where it came from or how much of it arrived at once. Those qualities translate not just in basketball, but in performance, in any arena where presence and authenticity matter more than technical precision. Professional wrestling is not really about athleticism in the way basketball is. It is about presence. It is about connecting with an audience. It is about being able to command attention and tell a story with your body and your attitude. Those are Cunningham's strengths. That is what she had been doing all season, and that is why Buss saw something in her that traditional basketball people might have missed. What kept the offer from feeling like a novelty stunt was the infrastructure behind it, and the genuine enthusiasm Cunningham herself brought to the subject. Women of Wrestling was not some new venture built around a single viral WNBA moment. The promotion had been running since the year 2000, accumulating 10 full seasons and more than 200 episodes with existing media deals through Pluto TV and Paramount+. This was an established organization with real reach and real programming, extending a real invitation to a player they genuinely believed fit their world. And Cunningham, it turned out, had been a fan of that world for a very long time. On the debut episode of her podcast launched that same summer, she talked about growing up following professional wrestling with the kind of specific, unprompted enthusiasm that is genuinely difficult to fake for a media appearance. Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Goldberg. She named performers from an earlier era with real affection, the kind that comes from actually watching, from loving the sport, not from a publicist's briefing notes. That history gave the wrestling offer a credibility it would not have had if it had arrived completely out of nowhere. This was not a famous athlete being dangled in front of an unfamiliar industry for a one-time appearance designed to generate headlines. This was a legitimate fan being invited to compete in something she had loved since childhood. The offer made sense in that context. Cunningham's response was carefully worded in a way that managed to be completely open without making any actual commitment. She told a reporter covering the Fever that she would not rule out exploring the opportunity once the WNBA season had concluded. That double negative, would not, was intentional and precise. It left every door open while closing none of them. It kept the story alive. It kept the speculation running, and it did so without saying a single thing that could be used against her or turned into a distraction from the basketball she was still in the middle of playing. By the time the wrestling conversation entered the public record, Cunningham had stopped being a supporting character in someone else's narrative. She had become fully and undeniably the story herself. She was the main event. The fine that the league had issued weeks earlier, specifically designed to bring her volume down and reduce her visibility, had in every measurable way done exactly the opposite of what was intended. It had accelerated her rise. Pull back far enough from any individual moment, the tick-tock, the Arby's shirt, the wrestling offer, and the shape of what happened this season becomes very clear. Every time the WNBA attempted to manage Cunningham's behavior through financial punishment, the punishment generated more attention than the original incident ever would have produced on its own. That is the core problem with their approach. There were 3 fines across the season. $400 for the Sheldon incident where she protected her teammate. $500 for the sarcastic lip sync calling out referees. $1,500 for comments on her own podcast. Each one individually trivial in financial terms. Most professional athletes pay fines without thinking about them. It is just part of the cost of doing business. But collectively, across the season, these fines assembled a narrative the league never intended to author. The narrative was that the league's most protective player, the most outspoken player, the most authentically engaged player kept getting penalized for exactly the qualities her fans most valued in her. She was being punished for loyalty to her teammate. She was being punished for speaking up about officiating. She was being punished for being herself. That is a terrible narrative to accidentally build about yourself as an organization, and there was no clean way out of it once it had formed. The league's approach to managing player behavior was built on a set of assumptions that made sense in a different media environment, one that no longer exists. The strategy was simple: control the message, issue a quiet fine, move on before the story gains momentum. Keep everything quiet. Keep everything behind closed doors. Maintain institutional authority through secrecy. That approach works reasonably well when players have limited direct access to their audience and depend on league-adjacent media channels to be heard at all. It does not work when the player being fined has a phone in her hand, a large social following that includes millions of people, and the instinct to post the fine amount publicly before the league's communications department has even finished drafting its internal response. Cunningham had all 3 of those things. She did not reinvent this dynamic. She simply existed within it with more comfort and more speed than the league knew how to respond to. Other players took notice throughout the season. Her approach was transparent, slightly self-deprecating, entirely public, and it offered a template that did not require anger or manufactured drama to be effective. She made the mundane administrative act of being fined into content. And content delivered consistently to an audience that was already invested compounds in exactly the way a quiet apology never does. One fine gets paid quietly. The next fine gets posted online. The third fine becomes part of an ongoing narrative about institutional overreach. The officiating frustration that ran underneath all of this was never really Cunningham's issue alone. Coaches across the league had been raising the same concerns throughout the season in post-game interviews. They were careful enough with their language to avoid fines themselves, but consistent enough that the pattern was impossible to miss. What Cunningham's fines accomplished in ways that must have been deeply uncomfortable for the league office was give all of that distributed frustration a single visible lightning rod. Fans who had been irritated by officiating issues in New York, Las Vegas, Seattle, Chicago, all across the league, they suddenly had a concrete story they could point to and a player they could rally around. The fines did not manufacture that sentiment. They organized it. They gave it a focal point. They transformed diffuse frustration into concentrated loyalty around a single person. There is a question sitting underneath all of this that nobody in the league office has answered publicly and probably will not. Was there a version of this situation where improved officiating, addressed earlier in the season, made any of this impossible? Probably. A player cannot become the physical embodiment of fan frustration about missed calls if the calls are not being missed in the first place. A sarcastic TikTok directed at referees does not hit 1.3 million views in a league where the officiating is broadly considered fair and competent. The infrastructure for Cunningham's rise was not built by Cunningham. It was built by a problem the league had and did not prioritize fixing. The league created the conditions for her to become a voice for fan frustration. All she did was speak into that void and let authenticity do the work. A $500 fine is, in purely financial terms, a rounding error. It is nothing. A professional sports league spends more than that on routine office supplies in a week. It is not even a significant expense in any meaningful accounting sense, but set it against everything it indirectly generated, and the arithmetic becomes genuinely absurd. Set the $500 fine against the endorsement interest it helped generate. Set it against the follower growth it accelerated. Set it against the brand partnerships it indirectly made possible, the deals with Adidas and Quest Nutrition and Spindrift, and all the other companies that decided Cunningham was worth investing in. Set it against the wrestling offer from a co-owner of one of the most famous franchises in American sports. Set it against the podcast launch, the visibility, the transformation of a role player into a marketable personality. The league spent $500 buying Sophie Cunningham's entire next chapter. That is the reality of what happened. They thought they were enforcing a rule. They were actually funding her career ascension. Consider for a moment what this season would have looked like under a different set of choices. Imagine if Cunningham had decided to take a quieter approach. Imagine if, after the Sheldon ejection, she had issued a quieter apology or allowed the league to manage the narrative. Imagine if instead of posting about the $500 fine, she had paid it quietly and moved on. Imagine if she had engaged in a private conversation with the league office instead of a public post about what happened. Imagine if she had carefully managed her social media presence, scrubbed of anything that could be interpreted as criticism of officiating or league policy. Imagine if she had been cautious, measured, aware of the consequences. All of those choices were available to her. All of them were options. All of them would have made her less visible, not more. All of them would have starved the exact moments that turned her into one of the most recognized personalities in women's basketball this season. She chose otherwise at nearly every turn, not out of a calculated strategy, or at least not one that appears to have been engineered in any formal sense. Out of instinct. Out of a genuine willingness to say what she actually thought. Out of a willingness to accept the consequences and find the whole process faintly ridiculous in a way that her audience found completely irresistible. That combination of authenticity and humor is what made the story stick. A sold-out Arby's shirt, designed, produced, and sold in the span of days based on a spontaneous outfit choice. A national brand ambassadorship announced in real time in front of millions of people who had no idea it was coming. An open invitation into professional wrestling from one of the most powerful ownership names in American sports. A fan base that grew louder and more loyal with every punishment the league handed down. All of it traceable back to a $500 fine that someone in a league office almost certainly assumed would end quietly on a Tuesday afternoon and never come up again. It did not end quietly. It has not stopped coming up. And the player at the center of all of it never asked to become a case study in how modern athletes navigate institutional power in the age of social media. She did not wake up that morning planning to break the WNBA's business model or expose weaknesses in how the league operates. She just refused to be quiet when she watched her teammate absorb hits that officials were not calling. She decided to say something about it. She got ejected for that choice. She got fined for saying something about the ejection. She posted about the fine. She wore a shirt with Arby's. She got offered a wrestling contract. At every stage, she just acted, responded naturally, and moved forward. That instinct, honest and stubborn and slightly amused at the absurdity of her own situation, is what built the loyalty that no brand partnership or wrestling deal can fully explain. It is also, if the league is paying attention, the most important thing to understand about what women's basketball is becoming. The most important thing to understand about the kind of players and personalities who are going to define the sport in the years ahead. The athletes who will drive engagement and build fan loyalty are not the ones playing it safe. They are not the ones waiting for permission or managing their image to protect institutional interests. They are the ones who are willing to be themselves, to take positions, to say things that matter to them, and to trust that their authenticity will resonate more powerfully than any calculated move ever could. Cunningham proved that theorem across an entire season. Every fine confirmed it. Every brand deal validated it. Every additional follower reinforced it. The $500 fine was supposed to be the end of the story. It was supposed to be the moment where the league asserted control, where institutional power made clear that certain behavior would have consequences. It was supposed to be a warning. Instead, it became the beginning of something much larger. And what that reveals about the current state of women's basketball and professional sports more broadly is genuinely significant. For decades, professional sports leagues have operated under the assumption that institutional power is unquestionable. The league sets the rules. The league enforces the rules. The player complies or faces consequences. The fan accepts the narrative that the league constructs because the league controls the media channels through which that narrative travels. That model worked in a world where fans depended on ESPN and newspapers and league-controlled broadcast to understand what was happening. They have no alternative information sources. But that world no longer exists. Fans now get information directly from players. Players can post their own content to millions of people without any intermediary. Fans can organize and coordinate through social media. Athletes can build brands independent of league infrastructure. That changes the power dynamic fundamentally. The league does not have a monopoly on narrative anymore. And when they try to use institutional power against a player in this environment, they often end up just accelerating that player's rise. Cunningham's rise also reveals something important about what fans actually want from women's basketball. It is not just elite athletic performance, though that matters. It is authenticity. It is personality. It is a willingness to take positions and speak up about things that matter. It is someone being real, being themselves, being brave enough to accept consequences for saying what they actually think. Fans do not respect caution. They respect courage. That is why Cunningham's brand deals keep coming. That is why her followers keep growing. That is why the wrestling offer felt credible. Because she proved, across an entire season, that she was going to be exactly who she was, regardless of what the institution wanted from her. That kind of authenticity cannot be faked. It cannot be manufactured in a brand strategy meeting. It has to be real, and Cunningham's was real. The league's response to all of this, if they are paying attention, should be clear. Fines do not work as a behavior management tool in this media environment. They do not deter behavior. They just broadcast the behavior more widely. The more the league fines players for speaking up, the more the league appears to be protecting something that needs protecting, which creates the impression that the league itself is the problem. If the league wants to address frustration about officiating, they cannot do it by fining the players who raise the issue. They have to actually fix the officiating. They have to address the problem. Because as long as the problem exists, players will keep speaking about it, and the league will keep fining them, and that cycle will just keep making the league look worse. Cunningham did not break the WNBA. The league already had problems. She just made them visible. She brought them into the light. And then she thrived anyway, which proved that institutional power has limits. It proved that an athlete with authenticity and audience can transcend institutional constraints. It proved that the future of women's basketball belongs to the players willing to be themselves. What happens next is the real question. Will other players follow Cunningham's template? Will other players start using their platforms to speak up about issues they care about? Will the league start seeing more instances of players refusing to go quiet, posting about their fines, building their own narratives? Probably. And the league will have to decide whether to double down on fines, which will just accelerate that process, or actually address the underlying issues. The $500 fine was supposed to silence Sophie Cunningham. It did the opposite. It made her louder. It made her more visible. It turned her into the most recognizable personality in women's basketball. And that fact, more than anything else, reveals where the real power actually lies in the modern sports environment. It is not with the institution. It is with the athletes brave enough to be themselves. The $500 fine was supposed to be administrative. It was supposed to be invisible. It was supposed to disappear without anyone noticing. Instead, it became the most expensive investment in an athlete's career development in WNBA history. Sophie Cunningham did not ask for this. She did not plan it. She did not expect that refusing to be quiet would turn her into a global story. She just protected her teammate. She spoke up about officiating. She wore a funny shirt. She posted about her fine. And at every stage, she acted authentically, without calculating consequences, without asking permission. That authenticity is what made her story stick. The lesson here extends far beyond women's basketball. It is about what happens when athletes reclaim narrative power from institutions. It is about what fans actually want from their sports. It is about authenticity being more valuable than perfection. It is about one player proving that institutional power has limits and that the future belongs to people willing to be themselves, consequences be damned. The WNBA thought they were managing a problem. They were actually building a legend. And the best part, Sophie Cunningham still has her entire career ahead of her.